The desert stretched wide and empty under the golden sun. Dust rolled over the hills and the wind carried stories. Old stories about a woman who walked taller than any man. Her name was Tall Bird, and the people who had seen her said she could look a rider straight in the eye even when he was sitting on his horse. The Apache people called her a blessing from the spirits, born to remind the world that women could be as strong as mountains. Outsiders, though, told different tales. Some said she was not real. Others claimed she was a giant who scared off bandits and wild wolves. But Tall Bird was real. She lived in a small Apache camp near the Red Canyons, where the river ran quietly between the rocks. Every morning she helped carry heavy water jars for the elders, and even the strongest men stepped aside when she walked by. Her body was tall and powerful, yet her eyes were soft and kind. She was proud of who she was, but often tired of being treated like a legend instead of a woman. The nearby towns were full of cowboys and ranchers who had heard about her. Whenever they gathered at the saloon, they talked about the 8-foot Apache woman. Some laughed, some doubted, and a few wondered if they'd ever see her with their own eyes. One of them was Jack Coleman, a rancher known for his calm nature. Jack was not like most of the men around him. He didn't care much for wild talk or drinking contests. He worked hard, took care of his horses, and spent quiet evenings watching the sunset. One night, as the men gathered after a long day, the topic turned again to the Apache woman. "Did you hear?" said one cowboy with a grin. "They say she can lift a horse saddle like it's a loaf of bread. Or maybe she can crush a man's hand without trying," another joked, laughing loudly. Jack smiled politely but didn't join their jokes. He had grown up learning to respect people, not mock them. But the others kept teasing him, especially one man named Luke. "Hey, Jack," Luke said with a smirk. "You're always so calm. Maybe you're the only one brave enough to marry that giant woman. You'd make strong children, I tell you that." The men roared with laughter, and Jack chuckled softly, shaking his head. "I don't think she'd ever agree to that," he said kindly. "But I suppose she deserves someone who treats her right. Someone like you, maybe?" Luke said. Jack didn't answer. He just looked toward the horizon, where the desert stretched into mystery. Something about the stories of Tall Bird stirred something in his heart. Maybe it was because she sounded strong yet lonely, proud yet misunderstood. He didn't know it yet, but fate was already pulling him toward her world. A few weeks later, the weather turned harsh. The sky darkened and a sandstorm rolled in across the plains. Jack was out herding cattle miles away from his ranch. The wind screamed like 1,000 spirits, and the sand stung his face. He tried to find shelter, but the storm grew stronger. His horse panicked and bolted into the wind, leaving him stranded. He wrapped his bandana over his mouth and kept walking, but soon he couldn't see where he was going. The world turned into a whirl of dust and pain. His throat burned, his legs gave out, and he fell to his knees. The last thing he remembered was calling for help, though he knew no one could hear him out there. When he opened his eyes again, everything was quiet. The air smelled of smoke and herbs. He felt warmth near his face, like a small fire burning gently. Slowly, he realized he was lying inside a large tent. Then a shadow moved beside him. It was her, Tall Bird. She stood at the edge of the firelight, her tall frame outlined by the glow. Her long black hair fell down her back, and her skin shone softly in the light. She looked calm, steady, and strong, but her eyes, deep and gentle, held concern. Jack blinked in disbelief. For a moment he thought he must be dreaming. "You are safe now," she said quietly, her voice smooth and calm. The storm passed. He tried to sit up, but pain shot through his arms. She gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "Rest," she said. "You were lost in the storm. The desert can take men quickly." Jack's lips were dry. "You saved me," he whispered. She nodded without pride. "You were near death. The spirits must have sent me." He studied her face, trying not to stare. "Then I owe them my life," he said softly. "And you, miss?" For the first time, a hint of a smile touched her lips. "You owe no one. You will live." "That is enough." Over the next few days, she cared for him silently. She brought him water from the river, fed him soft bread and herbs, and changed the bandages on his arms. Jack watched how gently she moved, strong hands doing careful work. Sometimes she sat by the fire and sang in her language, a quiet tune that made the nights feel less lonely. He wanted to thank her, to talk more, but she rarely spoke. When she did, her words were simple. He learned that she lived alone near the canyon. apart from the main Apache camp. Some said her height made people treat her differently, as if she didn't belong anywhere. She was respected, yes, but also kept at a distance. One evening, when the sky turned red, Jack found enough strength to sit outside the tent. She was sitting near the fire, sharpening a knife made of stone. He watched her for a while before saying, "Do you ever get tired of being talked about?" She looked up slowly. "What do you mean?" "I've heard stories about you in town," he said. "They say you're taller than a horse. They say you scare men away." She gave a short laugh, almost amused. "And what do you say?" He smiled softly. "I say people talk too much, and they don't know you." Her expression softened a little. "You speak kindly for a cowboy," he shrugged. "I just speak the truth." The wind blew through the canyon, carrying the smell of sage and dust. After a long pause, he said, "If I were taller, maybe I'd ask to marry you. Then people would really have something to talk about." For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then she threw her head back and laughed, a deep, beautiful laugh that echoed across the rocks. "A cowboy and an Apache woman," she said between smiles. "That's like the sun trying to marry the moon. It's not meant to be." "Maybe not," he said quietly. "But sometimes the sun and moon meet just for a moment. The world calls it an eclipse." Her eyes met his, and for the first time her laughter faded into a thoughtful silence. She didn't answer, but she didn't walk away either. That night, as he lay under the stars near her camp, Jack listened to the sound of her voice as she spoke softly to her horses. The way she moved, the way she spoke to the earth, made him realize she wasn't just a tall woman. She was something rare, someone strong enough to carry her pain, yet gentle enough to heal a stranger. In the quiet of the desert night, Jack promised himself something he couldn't quite explain. He didn't know if he would ever see her again once he left, but he knew one thing. His life had already changed. The storm that almost took his life had brought him to her, and the woman who laughed at the idea of love would soon be the one who taught him its truest meaning. The wind outside whispered softly through the canyon. Somewhere in the dark, the tall woman stood looking at the stars, her heart heavy with questions she couldn't name, and far below her, the cowboy she had saved drifted to sleep, not knowing that his fate had already become tied to hers in ways no one could have imagined. The next morning, the desert woke in quiet gold. The air was cool and still, and thin rays of sunlight stretched over the red cliffs. Jack slowly opened his eyes to the sound of horses snorting nearby. His body was sore, but he felt stronger. When he sat up, he saw a tall bird standing by the river, her reflection long and steady in the water. She was feeding her horses, whispering to them in her soft Apache tongue. Her voice sounded calm, like the wind brushing through leaves. For a while, Jack simply watched her, not wanting to break the silence. There was something peaceful about the way she moved, graceful but powerful, like the desert itself. He remembered her laugh from the night before. It still echoed in his mind, warm and teasing. He smiled faintly, even though she hadn't meant it as a promise. When she turned and saw him awake, she gave a small nod. "You should eat," she said, pointing toward a bowl of cornmeal near the fire. "You need strength to travel back." Jack looked down. "You're sending me away already?" "You belong to the white man's world," she said simply. "This is not your place." He looked around the canyon, the red walls, the quiet river, the smell of herbs in the air. "It feels peaceful here," he said. "Safer than my own land." She shook her head slowly. "Peace does not belong to those who wander. It belongs to those who know where they stand." Her words were heavy yet calm. Jack didn't argue. He ate quietly, thinking about the miles he'd have to cross alone. But something inside him felt uneasy, not fear, but longing. He had met many people in his life, yet no one had left such a strong mark so quickly. After breakfast, she helped him prepare a horse she had caught wandering near the canyon. "This one will take you home," she said, tightening the saddle strap. "He knows the trail." Jack watched her work. "You've done more for me than anyone ever has," he said quietly. "I don't know how to thank you." She gave a faint smile. "You do not owe thanks. The desert saved you. I only listened." When he mounted the horse, she stepped back. The early sun painted her figure in golden light. "Will I see you again?" he asked. Her expression stayed still, unreadable. "The desert is wide," she said softly. "It remembers all who pass through. Maybe it will remember you." He wanted to say more, to promise something, but words failed him. He only nodded and turned the horse toward the open land. As he rode away, he looked back once more. She was still standing by the canyon, tall and unmoving like a spirit watching over him. The journey home took 2 long days. When Jack finally reached his ranch, his friends were shocked. They had thought he was lost in the storm. Luke, the loudest of them all, clapped him on the back and laughed. "I told you, Jack, you're too tough to die. Maybe the spirits carried you back." Jack smiled faintly. "Maybe they did," he said. When he told them that an Apache woman had saved his life, the men exchanged amused looks. "You mean the tall woman?" Luke said, eyes wide. "So she's real after all?" Jack nodded. "More real than you'd believe." The room filled with laughter and teasing. "So did she sweep you off your feet, Jack?" One man joked. "Did she promise to make you her husband?" Jack laughed with them, but his heart wasn't in it. He didn't want to turn her kindness into a joke. Deep down, he knew what they would never understand. She had saved him not just from death, but from the emptiness of his own routine. That night, when everyone had gone home, Jack sat by the fireplace alone. He kept seeing her face in the firelight, hearing her quiet words. He remembered how her hand had steadied him, how her laugh had filled the canyon. The thought of never seeing her again made him restless. Days turned into weeks, but her image never faded. Every time he rode out near the canyon, he looked for her shadow against the cliffs. Finally, one evening, he decided to leave a gift. He carved a small wooden horse and placed it on a rock near the riverbed where he had first seen her. He left it there without a note, unsure if she would ever find it. The next morning, the carving was gone. Jack smiled. He returned the next week with another gift, a piece of cloth embroidered with flowers, something his late mother had made. He left it in the same spot. The next day, it too was gone. He kept doing this quietly, week after week, small things from his world offered to hers. He didn't know if she kept them or threw them away, but the act itself gave him peace. Then, one evening, as he sat by his campfire near the canyon, he heard soft footsteps behind him. He turned, and there she was. She stood at the edge of the light, her tall frame shadowed by the sunset. Her long hair moved with the wind. Jack froze, then smiled. "I hoped you'd come." She looked at the fire for a moment before speaking. "Why do you leave things at the river?" "I wanted to thank you," he said. "And maybe I wanted to see you again." "You should not come here," she said, her tone calm but serious. "My people will not welcome you." "I don't mean harm," he replied gently. "I just couldn't forget you." She watched him in silence, her eyes thoughtful. Then she sat down across from him. "The desert doesn't like men who come back for dreams," she said. "It changes them." He smiled faintly. "Maybe I've already changed." The fire flickered between them, painting orange light on her face. For a while neither spoke. Then Jack asked softly, "Why do you live away from your tribe?" She stared into the flames. "When you are different, people look but do not see you. They respect you but do not know you." He understood that feeling. Loneliness, he realized, had many shapes. "I know what that's like," he said quietly. "People think I'm quiet because I'm cold, but it's just because I don't fit in with their noise." For the first time, she smiled gently. "Maybe we both walk alone," she said. "Maybe we don't have to," he said, half joking, half serious. She gave a soft laugh. "You talk strange for a cowboy." "Maybe I'm just talking like a man who finally found someone who listens," he said. She looked at him across the fire, her eyes softer now. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full, like the space before rain. They spent that night talking under the stars. He told her about his ranch, his horses, the quiet life he led. She told him stories from her childhood, of wild rivers, of her mother's songs, of running barefoot through the desert after storms. Her voice carried both pride and sadness. When the first light of dawn touched the canyon, she stood. "The night ends," she said. "You must go before the sun rises. My people watch this land." Jack stood too, not wanting to leave. "Will you come again?" She hesitated. "The desert decides," she said softly. Before he could answer, she turned and disappeared between the rocks. He stood there long after she was gone, feeling both lost and alive. When he returned to his ranch that morning, the world looked different. The same hills, the same sky, but everything felt brighter, more alive. He didn't know what was happening to him, only that something deep inside was changing. Each night after that, he looked toward the canyon, hoping for her shadow. The wind that carried through the plain seemed to whisper her name. He didn't know it yet, but that quiet meeting by the fire, was the beginning of something that would shake both their worlds. Two souls from different lands, bound not by choice but by something deeper, the kind of bond that grows quietly, like roots under the sand, unseen yet unbreakable. The desert, wide and endless, had seen many stories, but this one it would remember. Weeks passed and the nights grew cooler. The desert wind had changed its song, whispering softly through the grass as if it carried secrets. Jack spent his days working on the ranch like always, feeding the horses, mending fences, watching over his cattle. But no matter how busy he stayed, a part of him was somewhere else. Every time he saw the sunset glowing over the horizon, he remembered her face in the firelight, her laugh echoing across the canyon walls. He tried to forget, but the heart has its own memory. He had met many people in his life, yet no one had made him feel so alive by simply standing near. Sometimes when he rode out alone, he found himself turning his horse toward the red cliffs again. He would stop near the same riverbank where they had talked, waiting, hoping she might appear. She never did. Still, he couldn't stop returning. Each time he left small things, a wooden carving, a handful of wildflowers, a silver coin he had carried since childhood. Every gift was a quiet way of saying he remembered her. Sometimes the things disappeared by morning. Other times they stayed for days, touched only by the wind. He didn't know if she took them, but he liked to imagine her smile when she found them. The ranchers around town began to notice his absences. Luke teased him endlessly. "You been visiting your tall lady again, Jack?" he'd say with a laugh. "Careful or she might lift you up and never put you down." Jack smiled faintly but didn't answer. There were some things that words could not explain to those who only wanted to joke. One late afternoon, after finishing his chores, Jack sat on his porch, staring at the distant desert. The sky was painted with pink and orange, and he felt the pull again. The strange, invisible pull that always led him back to her. Finally, he saddled his horse and rode out. The sun was setting when he reached the canyon. The air was cool, and the shadows stretched long across the sand. He built a small fire and sat beside it, his mind full of memories. Hours passed quietly. Then when the moon climbed high, he heard something, soft footsteps approaching. He turned quickly, and there she was. Tall Bird stood in the moonlight, her long hair shining silver under the stars. She was as calm as ever, yet there was a gentleness in her eyes he hadn't seen before. "You shouldn't be here," she said quietly. "I couldn't stay away," he replied. "I guess the desert remembered me after all." For a moment, neither spoke. The fire cracked softly and the river murmured nearby. Then she asked, "Why do you keep coming back?" "Because I don't feel lost here," he said. "When I'm with you, everything feels right." She looked down at the sand. "You talk like a poet, Cowboy. But words can be dangerous. Our worlds do not mix," Jack smiled gently. "Maybe not, but hearts don't follow maps." Her lips twitched as if she wanted to smile but couldn't. She sat down across from him. "You always speak strange," she said. "I was raised by my mother," he said softly. "She told me a man's worth is not in his land or cattle, but in his heart. Maybe that's why I talk this way." For the first time, Tall Bird laughed quietly. "Your mother was wise," she said. They sat together for a long while, watching the fire burn low. The silence between them wasn't empty. It felt alive, full of unspoken things. Then she told him stories from her people, of how the desert was born, of spirits that danced in the rain, and of how every creature carried a purpose. Her words painted pictures in his mind, and he listened as if afraid to miss a single one. When her voice fell silent, Jack said, "You see the world in a way I never have. You make everything feel sacred." She looked at him curiously. "Do you believe in sacred things?" "I do now," he said softly. Her eyes lingered on him for a moment before she looked away. The firelight flickered across her face, making her look almost otherworldly. As the night grew colder, Jack offered her his blanket. "You'll need it more than I do," he said. She hesitated. "I do not need your kindness." "I know," he said with a small smile. "But I want to give it." That quiet gesture changed something between them. She took the blanket and wrapped it around her shoulders. "You're strange for a cowboy," she said again. "Maybe," he replied. "But I think we both are strange in our own worlds." The stars above seemed brighter that night. They stayed by the fire until dawn, talking about simple things, horses, rain, dreams, and laughter. He told her about the loneliness of ranch life, and she told him how the wind sometimes kept her awake because it carried too many memories. When the sun began to rise, she stood up. "I must go," she said softly. He stood too. "Will you come again?" She looked at him for a long moment. "If the desert allows it." Then she walked away, her tall figure fading into the light of morning. Jack stood there long after she disappeared, the world feeling both beautiful and painful at once. He knew he couldn't stop thinking about her. He didn't even try. Days later, he saw her again, this time unexpectedly. He was riding near the canyon when he spotted smoke rising from a small fire. Curious, he approached quietly. There she was, sitting alone by the river, her hair tied with a strip of leather. She didn't look surprised to see him. "You again?" she said with a hint of amusement. "I was just passing by," he said, smiling. "Maybe fate's doing the work for me now." She shook her head but didn't send him away. "You always talk like the world listens," she said. "Maybe it does," he replied. "It brought me back to you." That day they shared food and laughter. Jack helped her gather firewood, and she showed him how to track a deer by reading marks in the sand. Every moment felt easy, natural, as if they had known each other for years. When the sky turned red, she said quietly, "If my people see us together, they will not understand." "I know," he said, "but I don't care who understands as long as we do." She looked at him then, truly looked, as if trying to see what kind of man he really was. "You are brave," she said finally. "Or foolish." "Maybe both," he said. She laughed, and the sound made his heart race. The next few weeks they met in secret whenever they could. Sometimes by the river, sometimes in the canyon caves when it rained. They never spoke of the future, they just lived in those small stolen moments full of quiet joy. He would tell her stories of the towns and their dances, and she would show him how to listen to the land. One evening, as they sat watching the sunset, she said, "You are not like others from your land." "I don't see color or tribe," he said gently. "I see people. I see you." She didn't answer, but her hand brushed against his. It was only a moment, but it said everything words could not. When he returned home that night, Jack felt lighter, as if the world had given him something rare. Yet deep down, he knew their peace would not last forever. The line between their worlds was thin, and one day it would be tested, but for now, as he looked up at the stars, he let himself believe that love, no matter how unlikely, could grow even in the harshest desert. And far away, in her camp, Tallbird sat under the same sky, holding one of his small wooden carvings in her hand. She turned it slowly in the firelight and smiled softly, though she didn't know why her heart beat so fast whenever she thought of that cowboy with the quiet eyes. In a land where nothing lasted, easily where storms erased trails and time buried footprints, the connection between them had begun to bloom like a desert flower after rain. It was fragile, it was rare, and though neither of them said it aloud, they both knew it was something worth protecting. The nights in the desert were turning cold again. The air carried the smell of rain that never quite came, and the moon rose bright over the red cliffs. Jack rode out often, always taking the same quiet path to the canyon. He told himself he was just checking the land or looking after a lost horse, but his heart knew better. Every visit brought him closer to the one person he couldn't forget. Tallbird always met him without surprise, as though she already knew he would come. They spoke less now, not because there was nothing to say, but because silence between them felt natural, like a language only they understood. When she looked at him, her eyes said more than words ever could. Sometimes she would bring him a piece of her world, a beaded bracelet, a bundle of herbs, or roasted corn wrapped in leaves. Jack always accepted her gifts with quiet respect. In return, he brought her small pieces of his life, a silver buckle, a new blanket, a knife with a carved handle. Their exchange was more than trade. It was trust. Weeks turned into months, and the bond between them deepened quietly. They found comfort in each other's presence, even though both knew their worlds stood far apart. She often warned him, "If my people find you here, they will be angry. They do not forgive easily." He would only smile and say, "Then I'll stay hidden in the shadows of your heart. No one will find me there." Sometimes she laughed at his words, sometimes she didn't, but she never asked him to stop coming, and he never could. Then one morning things changed. The Apache camp began whispering. Tallbird's people noticed her quietness, the way she smiled without reason, the way she wandered alone more often than before. Her mother watched her closely. One evening, as they prepared food by the fire, her mother said, "Your eyes are far away lately. You walk as if you follow a dream." Tallbird said nothing, but her hands trembled slightly. "Be careful," her mother warned gently. "Dreams can be strong enough to pull a woman from her tribe." Tallbird nodded, though she didn't answer. That night, when the camp slept, she slipped away under the stars. Her feet carried her down the familiar path to the canyon. She didn't expect to see Jack waiting, but he was there, sitting by the fire, staring at the flames. When he looked up and saw her, his eyes softened. "I was beginning to think you wouldn't come tonight," he said. "I had to wait for the moon to rise," she said, sitting beside him. They talked quietly, their words mixing with the sound of the wind. The air was cool and the night full of stars. When she looked up, she saw one star brighter than the rest. "That one," she said softly, pointing. "The old ones say it watches over people who are lost but meant to find each other." Jack followed her gaze. "Then I guess it's watching us," he said. She smiled faintly, but her heart felt heavy. She wanted to tell him something, but the words wouldn't come. Weeks later, her mother's suspicions grew. She noticed her daughter no longer joined the hunts and that her steps had slowed. When she finally confronted her, she saw the truth before it was spoken. Tallbird bowed her head. Her mother's face changed from confusion to shock, then to quiet sorrow. "The child of a cowboy," she whispered, more to herself than to her daughter. Tallbird didn't deny it. "Yes," she said calmly. "The child of the man who speaks with kindness, who listens, who does not see me as a giant or a ghost." Her mother sat down slowly, her heart torn between fear and love. "The tribe will not understand. They will see it as betrayal. You know the old ways." "I know," Tallbird said, "but I cannot undo what has begun. The spirits led him to me when the storm could have taken his life. Maybe that was their plan all along." Her mother looked into her eyes, then sighed deeply. "If this is the path you walk, you must be strong. The desert tests those who love beyond the rules." By the next morning, whispers spread through the camp like fire through dry grass. Some called it shame. Others called it fate. The elders gathered to decide what to do. When they asked who the man was, Tallbird stayed silent. She would not bring danger upon Jack by speaking his name. But news travels faster than secrets. A young brave who had once seen Jack near the canyon told the others. "It is the white rancher," he said bitterly. "I saw his tracks by the river many times." The camp erupted in anger. Men spoke of revenge, of chasing the cowboy away forever. The chief ordered that no one was to leave the camp until he decided their next move. That night, Tallbird sat by the fire, staring into the flames. Her hands rested gently on her stomach, where new life stirred quietly. The desert around her seemed to hold its breath. Meanwhile, miles away, Jack sat outside his cabin, unaware of what was happening. He looked at the moon and wondered why she hadn't come. He tried to convince himself she was just busy, but worry crept into his heart. 2 nights later, a shadow appeared at his ranch. It was a young Apache man, his face stern and his voice sharp. "You are the one they call Jack Coleman?" he asked. Jack nodded slowly. "I am." The man glared at him. "You're not welcome near our land anymore. Stay away if you value your life." Before Jack could speak, the man turned and rode off into the night, leaving only dust behind. Jack stood there, stunned. He understood then that something serious had happened. Without hesitation, he saddled his horse and rode toward the canyon, the fear in his chest heavier than the wind. When he reached the river, dawn was breaking. The world was painted in soft pink and gold. There she was, standing alone near the water. He dismounted and walked toward her. "Tell me what's wrong," he said gently. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with emotion. "They know," she said quietly. "They know about us." Jack's breath caught. "Then I'll go to them. I'll tell them I mean no harm." She shook her head. "No, you can't. They would not listen. To them we broke the line that cannot be crossed." He took a slow step closer. "And what about you? What happens to you?" Her voice trembled slightly. "I will face them, but Jack, there's something more." He searched her face, confused. "What is it?" She took his hand and placed it gently over her stomach. "You've given me life," she whispered. "A child. Our child." For a moment, the world went still. Jack stared at her, unable to speak. His heart pounded so hard he could hear it in his ears. Then he whispered, "A child." Tears filled her eyes, though she tried to hide them. "The tribe will call it wrong, but I call it a blessing. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close as the morning wind wrapped around them. "You are not alone," he said firmly. "I will stand by you no matter what comes." She rested her head against his chest. "You cannot stay here," she said. "They will come for you. Let them come," he said. "They'll see my heart before they see my skin." She looked up at him, her eyes full of both love and fear. "You speak with courage, but courage cannot stop arrows." He smiled faintly. "Maybe not, but it can stop me from walking away." They stood there together, the sound of the river soft around them. For a long time, no words were needed. Later that day, when the sun rose high, Tallbird walked back to her camp. She knew what awaited her: anger, judgment, questions. Yet her steps did not falter. Inside her, she carried a truth stronger than fear. And back at his ranch, Jack waited, staring toward the horizon. He didn't know what would happen next, but he knew one thing for certain. His life now belonged not just to himself, but to her and to the child they had created together. The desert, which had once divided them, now held their secret like a quiet witness. The same wind that had nearly killed him months ago now carried whispers of love, danger, and destiny across the endless plains. The wind carried a heavy silence across the desert that morning. The sun rose slowly over the red cliffs, painting everything in soft gold. Inside the Apache camp, people whispered in low voices. Some looked toward Tallbird's tent with anger, others with curiosity. The story of her unborn child had spread to every ear, and even those who had admired her now kept their distance. Tallbird sat alone near the fire, her hands folded in her lap. Her eyes were calm, but her heart was heavy. She could feel the small life growing inside her, the quiet beating of two worlds becoming one. She thought of Jack, the way he had looked at her when she told him, the way he had promised to stand beside her no matter what. His courage had given her strength, but fear still lived quietly in her chest. When the chief called for a gathering, she walked into the circle with steady steps. The old men sat in a half circle, their faces carved with lines of wisdom and judgment. Smoke from the fire rose between them as the chief spoke. "Tallbird," he said, his deep voice echoing through the air. "The people say you carry a child that does not belong to our blood. Is this true?" She lifted her chin. "It is true," she said softly. "But this child carries more than blood. He carries the spirit of peace." Murmurs spread through the crowd. One man stood and shouted, "Peace with the cowboys? They have stolen our land and broken our hearts. No good can come from this." Tallbird looked at him, her voice steady. "You speak of pain but not of healing." "I did not plan this. The spirits brought him to me in a storm. I saved his life. He gave me kindness. If that is wrong, then let the desert judge me." The chief raised his hand to silence the noise. "No one will harm you," he said slowly. "But this is a matter for the spirits to decide. Until the child is born, you must stay away from the white man's land." Tallbird bowed her head. "I will obey." That night she packed her few things and went to live in a small tent near the river away from the camp. Her mother visited often, bringing food and comfort. Though her mother's eyes were filled with worry, she also saw something she could not deny: her daughter's quiet happiness. Far across the plains, Jack lived each day with restless hope. Every sunrise he looked toward the canyon, praying for a sign that she was safe. He worked the ranch as best he could, but his mind was always somewhere else. The sound of the wind reminded him of her voice. The soft touch of rain made him think of her hands. He wanted to ride to her camp, to stand before her people and tell them his love was not shameful, but he respected her request to stay away. Then, one afternoon, as he was mending a fence, a familiar figure appeared in the distance. It was an older Apache woman, Tallbird's mother. She rode slowly toward him, her face serious but not angry. When she stopped, Jack took off his hat respectfully. "I know you," he said softly. "You are her mother," she nodded. "She told me about you," she said. "About your heart." Jack's throat tightened. "Is she safe?" "She is strong," the woman said, "but she carries a heavy burden. The tribe watches her closely. The child will come soon." He felt his knees weaken. "I need to see her," he whispered. The woman looked at him for a long time, then finally said, "At night, when the moon rises, go to the river below the cliffs. She will be there, but you must not be seen." Jack thanked her deeply. That night, as the moon climbed high, he rode quietly through the desert. The stars glowed like lanterns above him. When he reached the river, he saw her standing there. her tall figure bright in the silver light. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then she turned and their eyes met. "You shouldn't have come," she said softly, though her voice trembled. "I couldn't stay away," he said. "I had to know you're all right," she smiled faintly. "I am stronger than they think. The spirits walk with me." He stepped closer, gently taking her hands. "And I walk with you, even from far away." They stood in silence, listening to the river. He could see the curve of her belly, the quiet promise of new life. "Our child," he whispered. "Will he ever be free to belong to both our worlds?" She looked up at the sky. "Maybe not today, but one day the world will grow wiser." They sat together until dawn, speaking softly about the future. Jack promised to build a small home near the canyon, between her land and his, so their child would always have a place that belonged to both. She didn't answer at first, but her eyes filled with warmth. "You dream big, cowboy," she said gently. "Maybe your heart is larger than your land. Or maybe my land just wasn't big enough for my heart," he said with a smile. When the first light of morning touched the sky, she stood and placed his hand over her heart. "If I do not see you again before the child comes, know this," she whispered. "The desert brought us together for a reason. What we started cannot be undone." He held her close one last time, his heart full of both love and fear. "I'll be waiting," he said. Weeks later, a great storm swept across the land. The sky roared and the river swelled with rain. In the middle of that storm, her time came. Her mother stayed by her side, holding her hand as she gave birth to a healthy baby boy. The moment the child cried for the first time, thunder echoed in the distance as if the heavens themselves blessed the moment. When she looked at her son, tears filled her eyes. He had her dark eyes and Jack's calm face. She whispered softly, "You are the bridge between two worlds, little one." The tribe came to see the child. Some still whispered, but others were moved by his innocence. Even the chief, an old man with sharp eyes, softened. "The spirits have spoken," he said. "The child is strong. Maybe he carries something our hearts have forgotten." Word of the birth reached Jack days later. When the storm cleared, he rode as fast as his horse could carry him. When he reached the river, Tallbird stood waiting, holding the baby in her arms. He dismounted and ran to her. She smiled through her tears and held the child out. "Your son," she said softly. Jack's hands shook as he took the baby. The small bundle was warm and light, his tiny fingers curling around Jack's thumb. For a moment, time stopped. "I never thought I'd see a miracle," Jack said quietly. "You already did," she replied, "the day you found me." They built a small home between the canyon and the plains, just as they had dreamed. The Apache visited often, curious at first, then friendly. The baby became a symbol of peace between the two sides, a child of both the land and the heart. Years passed, and the boy grew strong. He learned to ride from his father and to listen to the wind from his mother. He spoke both Apache and English, and wherever he went, people said the earth seemed calmer when he was near. Sometimes the tribe elders came to visit and sit by the fire. They watched the boy play and said, "Perhaps the Great Spirit knew what he was doing after all." As for Tallbird, she would sometimes laugh quietly to herself. Jack would ask, "What's so funny?" She'd shake her head and say, "I once laughed at the idea of loving a cowboy. I thought it was impossible. But the desert has a strange sense of humor." Jack would smile and kiss her forehead. "Then I'm glad the desert played its trick," he'd say. On evenings when the sun dipped low and the sky turned orange, the three of them would sit outside their home, watching the world in peace. Their son would fall asleep in his mother's arms while Jack played a soft tune on his harmonica. The wind carried their laughter through the canyons, over the plains, across the land that had once divided them. And when travelers passed by that quiet valley years later, they often told a story about it. They said a giant Apache woman once lived there with a cowboy, and together they built a bridge between two worlds. They said their son grew up wise and kind, a man who brought peace where others saw only walls. The story spread far and wide, but those who told it always ended the same way, with the image of a tall woman standing by the river, her hand resting gently on the shoulder of the man beside her, both smiling as their child played in the golden dust. It was proof that sometimes the strongest love begins with laughter and ends with a legacy that never fades.